And welcome back. Joining us for our first conversation, of course, is the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Jamaica, Ms. Kamina Johnson-Smith, here to talk to us about the agenda that took place at the CARICOM Mexico Summit yesterday. Good morning, Kamina. Welcome to Belize.
Yes.
And such a brief welcome, because I know that you're leaving today.
Yes, but I'm very glad to be here, at
Definitely.
least to have touched down for the first time and to know that I'm planning to come back. And your Foreign Minister, Minister Elrington, who I work very well with in the CARICOM context, has already said you have to come back no less than 5 days. So we are agreed.
Definitely.
I love his timeline.
Definitely. So for our viewers, just a quick reminder of the importance of the CARICOM Mexico Summit and what it encompassed.
Okay, excellent. Well, you know, CARICOM and Mexico have had a long relationship. They were actually the first country to sign a joint binational commission with us from as far back as 1974. But the relationship hasn't always been optimized. But this summit, which is the fourth, I believe, was, I think, a strong signal of the intention on both sides for us to deepen and strengthen our relationship and our cooperation. And why I say that it was a particular signal is because the fact is Mexico just had serious earthquakes, two serious earthquakes where hundreds of people died, and they are really still very much in the throes of reconstruction. But the president came, and we on our side, of course, have had serious hurricanes with massive reconstruction efforts also underway. And yet CARICOM still put together that we held the conference, we didn't postpone it. And that was in itself a demonstration. And then beyond that, on the summit agenda, of course, we not only looked at evaluating the cooperation efforts which were underway through the technical cooperation program, which sits within the summit structure, but also looked at the Mesoamerica Fund, which was a Central American fund and then extended to the Caribbean and Mexico. And this allows us access to grant funding for infrastructural programs, which we normally would not have the fiscal space to undertake because of our fiscal situations. And we all are, save Haiti, are highly indebted middle-income countries. And because we're middle-income countries, we're not able to access some of the funds, concessionary rates, and the grant funding. And this Mesoamerica Fund provides grant funding. So all across the regions, there are examples of countries that either have projects underway or that have completed significant projects in their infrastructural program, Jamaica included, and Belize, of course, I'm sure.
Definitely.
I know the president of Mexico offered, I think, $14 million, which is really putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I wanted to ask about was he made reference to the Caribbean catastrophe risk insurance facility.
Yes.
What is that? Could you explain to us and talk to us a bit about that?
Sure. That's what they've, Mexico has contributed the $14 million to strengthen that insurance fund. So certainly we are one of the most hurricane-prone areas in the world. We are just in the path. So every year it can be a surprise.
Right.
You know, and I'm sure from when we were in school, certainly when I was in school, we had the rhyme, you know, June too soon, July stand by, August you must, September remember, October all over. That is no longer the case with climate change, you know. The storm season has grown longer, and certainly the strength of the storms has increased. So insurance becomes and has become a more important consideration for our nations. And the CRIF, as we affectionately call it, maybe not so affectionately, but as we call it, the CRIF has become an even more important institution. So it's a parametric insurance fund into which nations pay a premium, same like you would to insure your car or anything, anything else of value, that you insure for natural disasters. There are challenges with the CRIF as well, however, because while you like your insurance, you get what you pay for, essentially. So you have defined structures as to what you would be able to draw down on if a flood occurred, what you'd be able to draw down on if a hurricane or tropical storm, etc. But your premium would determine whether you are actually covered for those things. And because of the same fiscal space constraints which I mentioned earlier, their challenges for nations.
Yeah.
So we know that Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica were able to draw down on the CRIF, which is very good in their circumstances. But also when you look at the amount versus the sheer extent of the disaster that they're reconstructing from, you realize that there are still limitations. So this 14 million contribution is certainly greatly appreciated by us. But CRIF is something that I have strong views on as well, in terms of us needing to review the affordability of the premiums, what we're able to claim for, and of course how we measure and are able to draw down on how much you get down and what it is used for. Those are matters I think we need to, certainly can't solve on this program, but I think as a region, those are things that we need to look at.
You know, as we're on the topic of natural disasters, and of course it's still very unfortunate what happened in these countries. I mean, Barbuda is completely almost gone, but we are resilient as a people,
Absolutely.
as a Caribbean people. But on the agenda, I know, was of course the topic of disaster management.
Yes.
Tell us about some of the lessons learned that came up yesterday that were eminent as it relates to moving forward.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, it goes without saying that disaster management, recovery and preparedness were high on the agenda. They in fact dominated discussions at the ministerial level and at the summit level, because you remember we had 2 meetings yesterday. Essentially, in terms of lessons learned, or one of the matters which we looked at very closely was the cultural shift that needs to take place in terms of everyone at every level, in every community and in every society, needing to understand the importance of being prepared. And you know, sometimes people say, boy, you know, them always say storm will come and no storm not come. And that's when it comes. Right? We think about, you know, we're going to build where we want, but it may be disaster prone. So a greater awareness and sensitivity of how it is that we educate our populations to be aware that things are getting worse, they're not getting better, and only planning and preparedness can help from a day-to-day existence perspective. So preparedness and the cultural leap that needs to take place was one of the issues dealt with. And one of the ways that we are dealing with it is in fact in cooperation with Mexico, because Mexico has presented to us, and they presented yesterday, an integral risk management strategy for the Caribbean, which is being proposed for us to examine elements of their proposal, things which they have done and can be expanded in order to support our own mechanisms. Because I think we have to recognize as well that we have pretty good mechanisms in place. SEDIMA is an excellent institution and is really more challenged by resource constraints than their actual ability and understanding of what needs to be done. So in that program is a risk mapping proposal, which would look at how it is that you build, where is most risk prone, where should you not build, where is it that people are likely to have to move from. So for low-lying countries like Belize, it's important, as well as for countries with a lot of rivers and that also have to manage the whole water management, risk of sea rise and river rise, etc. So that's important for us to look at, because how do you map your planning as a country just going forward, because we have to make sure that we're being more resilient. Secondly was or a major part of the proposal was also related to the point that I started with, community preparedness, because they have done a great deal, not only in terms of the website but social media, infographics that are color-based and coded with very sort of clear and punctuated messages. You know, what should you be doing at the preparation stage, or where there's a storm alert? What should you be doing while a storm is taking place, and what do you need to do after? Which would allow our own emergency management agencies, if we're able to use their information, and which they have started to translate, of course, as well into English, in order to be able to send out information to people at the relevant stages. Very important as well, and related to the community understanding of what needs to be done and when. And we also looked at the, apart from mapping and preparation, looking at how it is that we build more in a more resilient way, and looking at how our governmental agencies are able to address disasters when they occur. So you don't realize that, you know that you have a ministry with responsibility for disaster, an agency that's responsible, but what about all the rest of government that needs to continue? So when your Ministry of Foreign Affairs is taken out, how do you continue to coordinate international support? When your Prime Minister's office is taken out, where does the cabinet meet to take decisions? You know, where does your Ministry of National Security coordinate if they're taken out, for the police to also maintain law and order? So business continuity planning for government. They also are proposing a series of protocols that we can learn from for countries who don't have those in place, or for those who have them in place for review and strengthening and enhancement of programs. So it's actually a broad-based, yes, quite heavy, and everyone was very much engaged in the possibilities that can arise from the discussions.
That's interesting.
You said that the conversation yesterday was dominated mostly by disaster preparedness and responsiveness. I was curious to find out if regional security came up, because we know that President Trump is going to the non-militarized zone in North Korea, I believe. And the international feel is that we might be looking at the possibility of there being some political military unrest in the world. Obviously, that will have some economic and other ramifications for us in the region. That's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it is I cannot have the foreign minister of Jamaica come to Belize, so well connected to Belize historically, and not speak about the challenge that we're having with Guatemala and what, if anything, Jamaican government. I know this is a very ticklish issue.
Very ticklish.
Very ticklish issue, but I can't not raise it in terms of our friends in the Caribbean and what Belizean public can expect or believe that our friends in Jamaica believe or feel or are even monitoring the situation we're having with Guatemala. We're going to a referendum shortly.
Yes. So, well, what we can say and what we can wholeheartedly say is that Jamaica and the region stand with Belize in support of the principles of territorial sovereignty and security. So we are not contemplating, so far as I'm aware, any military action, because you are peacefully resolving your issues in a way that can be celebrated and applauded and set as an example. And of course, following the legal process which has been set out and negotiated over the years. So we stand in support in multilateral fora and as brother and sister nations of the territorial sovereignty of Belize. And that we continue to speak about. I myself have spoken about it in other circumstances. In fact, at my first meeting, first multilateral meeting after appointment was in Senegal. And the issue of Belize, I was actually asked to place it on the agenda because the minister had been unable to attend that particular meeting, but we still wanted the issue to be raised. And I was asked by Belize, I think there were only 2 ministers present, so I placed it on the agenda, and it was taken forth into the closing declaration of the ACP at that summit last year. So we very much stand in solidarity with you, and where we are called upon to give support, we are always at the ready. In terms of regional security, we continue to acknowledge and jealously guard the region as a zone of peace. We've recognized this for many years, and we continue to retain the principle of ensuring that we guard our region as a peaceful region, and that is still intact. We did not discuss a specific issue which you've raised, which you've alluded to, but certainly asserted in other contexts our retention of the region as a zone of peace, which includes matters that you would find in the joint declaration, such as our commitment to a nuclear-free zone. The region signed on in many respects to the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which is again based in Mexico, which was the first treaty to call for a nuclear-free, or to be a nuclear-free zone in a densely populated area. And there is now, of course, a new UN convention in respect of disarmament, nuclear disarmament, which Jamaica is preparing to sign. Other countries in the region have, but we're all at different stages of our signing up to that agreement, that convention.
Well, as we're on the topic of conventions and international documents, we know that as a region, a lot of the countries are ascribed to the Paris Accord and very much in tune with the effects of climate change. We know that these hurricanes are definitely, the amount of them are definitely a sign of how climate change is something real. So tell us about the conversation as it relates to adopting climate change principles and best practices that are best suited for our region.
Well, most of us have signed on to the Paris Agreement, and most of us have ratified, but not all. But as a region, we are certainly committed to recognizing, and we did have the discussion, that we are living the reality of climate change, and it's not a debate for us, it's not a concept, not a philosophical rather discussion, but a reality, and therefore has to be addressed. So in that context, we discussed the matter of access to funding in particular, because it all at the end of the day comes right back to how you are able to prepare your economy and your infrastructure to withstand. How do we describe ourselves as a resilient people, but you must build resilience into your community, into your building structures, but all of this costs. It all costs. And so access to funding, immediate access in the event of a disaster, that has been highlighted by the recent disasters, by countries seeking to get immediate funding to put tarpaulin on people's roofs, to put, ensure that the trees that have fallen are cleared away so that the cars that were not damaged can drive on the roads and people and public transportation can start again. The immediate needs, food, water, that type of supplies. So how do we get immediate access to funding? And then how do we get access to funding at a broader level to ensure the resilience of infrastructure? What is the capital cost of putting your electric lines underground so that every year hurricane season they're not at risk of being blown down? What is the cost of that? And what is the cost can you access funding for that when you actually don't have electricity now, and so the poles need to go back up? How do you balance as a government and as a multilateral institution or an international financial institution the weighing of the creation of your frameworks to allow countries to be able to respond and plan for greater resilience? That was a large part of the discussion, access to funding. So, the next COP is coming up. It's going to be held in Bonn. It's hosted by Fiji, and it's coming up next month. So that is, we were speaking about how it is we will work together in that context to push with Mexico. And Mexico, of course, is an OECD member, so they sit in places we don't sit, asking them to be a voice for us for such access and easier facilitation of funding.
The conversation with climate change has always been reactive. What do we do when climate change affects us negatively? But are there any opportunities that come from climate change? For example, fresh water. I mean, in certain parts of the world, fresh water, because of climate change, is a commodity. Have we looked aggressively at opportunities that come from climate change?
I can't say exactly how deeply that discussion is taking place at a governmental level, in that I'm sure private sector is always exploring opportunities, but right now the challenges for us, which are not necessarily reactive challenges, they are proactive because they are about planning for how we prevent the type of damage that's been occurring. Yes, for example, Dominica explained that they, coming out of Erica, the landslides flooded out their airport, flooded the runway so that planes could not land to assist until they were able to clear the runway, etc. So one of the things that they had to obtain funding for was the building of a retaining wall to prevent, because the mountain is not moving and the airport is not moving, and the climate, the natural disaster, people not moving and the natural disasters are not stopping. So how do you plan? So the airport now, although they had issues, this time, although the storm was worse, the hurricane was worse, they actually did not have the runway being flooded or being clouded by debris, and they were able to get up and running much faster. So it's about how do you ensure that you are able next time around and to get funding and able to do it being able to do it at within a reasonable time, a responsive time.
You know, they say that those who know it feel it. So in a country like Dominica, it's easy to sell the idea of climate change and why we need to access funding for it and why that funding is important. In countries where that's not the case, in other, especially within the region, how do you get buy-in from the average man on the street to let them know that accessing funding for climate change, this topic is important, even though we have issues with healthcare and education and other things that are more, I guess, bread and butter
daily,
issues.
yeah.
How do you sell that to get that buy-in?
Well, as you say, he who feels it knows it, and I think we've all been feeling it. And those countries who feel it less, they're less in the path, they are supportive because we recognize that as a region we stand and fall together. There are, for example, countries have had the conversation, heads have had the conversation about the fact that even if you are not directly affected, if we are trading with countries, if we have children who need to go to school who are still sitting CXC at the same time, how does that support take place? How do, we are impacted in other ways. When you have people who, for example, like Jamaica, we have a lot of our people are working in the countries that were affected, right? But if the law firm isn't rebuilt, if the school isn't rebuilt, if the hotel isn't rebuilt, where are they absorbed into the economy? How do they continue to live and how do the economies rebound and absorb back home if you are coming back home? So we're all impacted, and I think more and more people recognize this. And recognize that in a spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood, that it is that we have to care for each other and support each other.
Okay. We know also on the agenda was the issue of non-communicable diseases, and I think as opposed to natural disasters, hurricanes that we're used to, they come in different strengths, but they're pretty much the same thing especially as it relates to the damage that they cause. But when you have these pop-up diseases that come kind of out of left field, how it goes over my head how you prepare for something like that. So talk to us about how the conversation went as it relates to preparing for pop-up NCDs.
Well, the NCDs discussion were not, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on them yesterday because, as I said, disaster preparedness management, risk management dominated. We spoke a bit about trade and investment as well and how that leads to economic resilience between us as a region and between the region and Mexico. How is it that we enhance that? Mexico as a potential market for our products, etc. But we had at the technical level and leading up to the discussion, to the meeting, discussions about NCDs, and it's a big issue for the Caribbean because I think maybe 70% of deaths are caused by NCDs. So even beyond the pop-up diseases that come and cause an immediate impact on society, we actually have an insidious impact that takes place every day. The diabetes, high blood pressure, leading to kidney disease, cancer, and cardiac diseases. These are the biggest killers, bigger than violent crime in our region. And therefore, our ability to deal with this as societies has to be consistent. And part of that, of course, includes innovation in terms of how we get this across the people. In Jamaica, for example, I tell you about a new program we have. It's called Jamaica Moves. And it's based around the scientific recognition that 30 minutes of activity per day significantly reduces your chance of NCDs. So, and also looking at how we deal with with the number of the amount of sugar in schools and children's diets, because childhood obesity is also a big indicator for what happens in adulthood. How we deal with that, you know, maybe adjusting whether the bag juices can be sold in the canteen now, or whether they need to have. Yes, but we are a Caribbean country with fruit trees, so why are we not having the small farmers pick the mangoes that grow all over, make puree, and we sell them to the schools and make juice, so that the small farmer lives and the schools ensure that they're providing a healthy diet. School gardens to ensure that schools are also more self-sufficient in terms of the meals that they're providing for schools, for the students, where the schools are actually able to absorb that kind of activity, and other matters. So on the Jamaica moves, if you were to follow our Minister of Health, for example, you'll find him participating in aerobics classes all over, and people come from they come from the market. You have the old, you know, the seniors in the community out doing their little move, and you have the, you know, the sturdy persons coming out and having theirs, and you have the little kids coming out, and everybody's getting moving, because the message is 30 minutes of activity can reduce your risk of NCDs. So it's dealing with the preventative side, which helps, of course, on the cost side, because health is a big cost to all our societies. We have to be providing health care, and that is a part of the planning as well.
Simple and effective.
It's been working. It's actually pretty fun too.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just shift a little. In terms of, Belize has followed historically and socially Jamaica in a lot of areas. And there's one particular area where Jamaica has been the forerunner in the Caribbean that I know of in terms of the decriminalization of marijuana. I was curious to know, and there have been recent developments. I think there's been recent legislation to further regulate the way that the industry is dealt with. I had two specific questions about that. The first is, how much of it, the move towards decriminalization in Jamaica, was driven by cultural forces, and how much of it was driven by economic forces? And as a spin-off from that, because we've seen what has happened in Colorado, because that has spawned a huge industry with great financial returns. What is the expectation for that to do to the Jamaican economy, which will assist in other areas? If you have the money, then you can help to have the programs to move people from flood-prone areas, to deal with climate change issues. You can deal with educational issues. So, and then finally, what has that done in terms of, because Belize is also making moves. We had the recent amendment to the Misuse of Drugs Act 2017. What has that done for relations with the U.S.? Has there been any blowback from the U.S.?
Well, let me start with answering the question you didn't ask, which is what exactly have you done? We have not decriminalized ganja entirely. What we've decriminalized is the possession of 2 ounces or less.
2 ounces?
2 ounces or less. Is that so? Personal possession. Wow. Okay. So above that,
10 grams.
above that. So and I can't do the metric conversion right here, you know. But so 2 ounces or less, and the presumption above that is that your possession is in the context of dealing, so it remains criminal. And beyond that, there's also an acknowledgement of 5 plants per household.
Wow.
And that is because there are persons who use for medicinal purposes. And so 5 plants. Any more than 5 plants, you're presumed to be conducting a different type of production or a different level of production, exactly, cultivation, as well as its use for scientific research, scientific and medical research. So those are the specific contexts within which it has been decriminalized. And part of that, and this is I'm sure what Belize is managing as well, is the fact that cannabis is still Schedule 1 and Schedule 4 drugs in the international conventions within the UN, the relevant conventions. and therefore operating within a context where you want to abide by your international obligations. We are seeking to advocate for descheduling or rescheduling of cannabis, but at the same time, we're not prepared to go further than the conventions allow at this time. So decriminalized 2 ounces or less, and medical and scientific research, as well as a possession of 5 plants per household. That's the framework within which it exists. We also are strongly advocating, and our Ministry of Health is advocating, a strong educational effort around ensuring that adolescents are not led to believe that there are no health impacts whatsoever from smoking. We stand against smoking of everything in all forms, which are harmful to your health. So again, I suppose I also need to indicate to carve out, which is probably one of the most heavy driving forces that led to decriminalization, which is also the recognition of the sacrament, meaning our indigenous religion, Rastafarian movement. Of course, the Rastafarian religion, uses cannabis as a sacrament, and therefore that is recognized in the act as well. And that is another basis for its recognition within the UN context, because again, you don't just speak about indigenous populations and indigenous cultures within a a philosophical concept, and then when it comes to actual implementation, right? So recognition of ganja and its role in the sacrament is also recognized by our legislation. So again, to deal with the international context, regulation of the industry is very tight.
Right.
It is very tight. And therefore, we have not had the monetary windfall that has happened in Colorado, where, it's to be retailed and wholesaled and cultivated on a whole and taxed. That has not occurred in Jamaica. And as we've indicated, as we continue to advocate for a change of the international framework. And people say, well, if they do it in Colorado, why can't you do it here? Well, Colorado is not a small, open, vulnerable economy. Right. They have their own systems, and they cannot bank interstate. Yes. That all has to be dealt with internally. And therefore, it's apples and oranges. Yeah. We are internationally dependent on trade and relations. So the way in which we have done it, and on ensuring that we are at all stages sharing information with our international partners, etc., we have managed to ensure that there is less concern about the route that Jamaica is taking, because of course there was a concern that there would be massive export, an increase in illegal drug trading, etc. That has not occurred, because we continue to maintain our efforts in respect of our border control, border security, and as I said, the quantities are not recognized as. So people are impatient. There are strong advocates for greater cultivation and for decriminalizing the whole thing, but we have not taken that route. We have not taken that route because we recognize the vulnerabilities of our economy. So we're trying to manage the process.
You were speaking about looking. There was an expectation that there probably would have been an increase in transnational drug trafficking, and that has not happened. Are there any other expectations that probably were feared before the passing of the strict move to decriminalization in certain aspects? Were there other things that they were expecting, that Jamaica was expecting locally, internally, that probably pawned out, or things that they expected not to pawn out?
Well, I think I'm actually worried a little bit now that I'm stepping too far out of my portfolio. Oh. So, and next thing, my Minister of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, that is a key ministry, and the Ministry of Health, which is the other, of course. We manage the international side of the matter.
We wouldn't want that.
Yes, and I don't want them to come down on me and say, we send you over there to go and
do climate change.
Yes, to deal with to trade and investment, exactly. So I think what would be good is maybe if you have some more questions about how it's operating or how it's panning out, that maybe I can share them with our ministers for them to send to you in another context for general understanding.
Sure.
And just to indulge us, Minister, it's just because right now in Belize it's a very heavy,
Yes.
as you may
Of
know.
course.
And to compare mangoes, Julian and Imogen, what page out of the book of Jamaica could Belize take in terms of the considerations we make when adopting this, well, potentially decriminalizing it here in Belize? Just very briefly.
Well, I'd say public education is a very big deal. Public education is hugely important, not only for persons to understand exactly what has been done.
Yeah.
So, people take the headline, it's decriminalized. It's not entirely decriminalized.
Legal, right. And it's not legal. There's
No,
a difference.
and it's not legal,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's a ticketable offense rather than one that results in jail.
Yeah.
And let me speak about one of those benefits, as a matter of fact, because that is very important.
Yeah.
We were having a situation where we had maybe 400 young men per week before the courts, for possession of what would be a small amount for personal use, which was then clearly a non-violent crime. So it clogs up the court system.
Yeah.
It costs more to transport them to the court, to keep them when they cannot pay the fine, to have the lawyer there in court, the court clerk and the judge, taking up justice time that could be dealt with much more serious offenses. That has been removed. So that backlog, that has helped in the fight against backlogs within our court systems, and of course has really ensured that our young men who are being criminalized and therefore unable to apply for the police force, unable to apply for the defense force, unable to apply for teaching jobs, because all of these they're on your record. You're unable to, once you have a criminal record, it affects your ability to apply for a passport and a visa.
Yeah.
Those, so it has cleared the way to say, okay, we recognize that this is not a crime of violence. It is not a crime that impacts negatively on the rest of society if you are in possession of this small amount.
Yeah.
However, the public education side as well, to balance, to say smoking is bad for your health.
Yeah.
Smoking is not good for your health, whether it is cannabis or tobacco. Smoking is just not good. So they recognizing that your student population needs to understand that, so that when they hear free up, like what happened in Jamaica, and you have an immediate rise, that's a real issue.
Yeah.
So that's something that has to be managed as well.
If I could just push a little bit more, if you indulge me. Are there any social monitoring structures that are parallel to the legal move that is going on in relation to marijuana? And you probably would be, is that something you would be privy to in cabinet or something that you speak to as a government? Is there something, apart from, in Belize we have what we call NDAC, which is the National Drug Abuse Council.
We have a similar thing.
Yes. But is there something specific that has been a mechanism drafted or put together, structure put together specifically to go alongside the movement that is going on legally in Jamaica?
I'm not quite sure what you're...
In terms of, it's a very ticklish situation, and I'm sure the opponents, the persons who have been against it, I know Jamaica is a very strong religious, I lived there for 2 years, and has a very strong religious presence. I'm not only talking about the Rastafarian community I spoke about, but overall. And I'm sure that they demanded that certain safeguards be put in place. Or were there any safeguards apart from just the legislation itself, rather than just going to Parliament and passing legislation? Was there anything else in addition to that?
Well, the legislation establishes the body called the Cannabis Licensing Authority, and that is the authority that's responsible for issuing licenses for persons who wish to cultivate for the purpose of medical and scientific research, which is again what is permitted, and for medical use, again, that they're still developing the regulations to allow doctors to be able to prescribe, because doctors are not licensed to prescribe that type of medication at this point in time. And that is because people are still developing how it is that you dose
Yeah.
That's still a work in progress globally. You know, how do you identify how strong this plant is versus how much THC does it have versus the other chemical elements that are present in the in the plant. So there's a licensing authority and there are regulations which come out of that. Outside of government, there's of course our National Council on Drug Abuse, which manages the education aspect of it. And you have advocates on all sides. Yeah. You have your religious advocates, you have on the side of the Rastafarian and on the side of other churches, recognized churches. You have
researchers,
youth advocates. You have researchers as well who work on the scientific.
Is there anything at UA?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think UA was one of the first licensees. Yeah. UA and UTech were the first licensees, first two licensees in respect of scientific and medical research.
I'm proud of you. I'm really nice, so.
We're making progress, but it is measured progress.
Right.
And certainly as a government, it is challenging to manage the expectations of a populace which is so diverse, because there are people who believe strongly that this is the healing of the nation and will solve all our problems, and there are those who believe it will be the end of the world. Exactly. So again, education is huge. You don't have to wait for legislation to be passed to tell your young people that all smoking is not good for your health. You can do that before and help prepare so that, and also clarity of the messaging. Ensuring that it is not felt that it is a full free business. Because in fact, I'll just share on a much lighter note, that the week after the legislation came into effect, a man was arrested because he drove into a police station to ask directions with 20 pounds of ganja in his vehicle. Wow. Because he was selling. As far as he was concerned, it was no legal. So he drove into the police station to ask for directions for his delivery, and sure enough, he ended up in jail. But that just signifies, people need to understand, it's not legalized, the difference between legalizing and criminalizing, and how much, etc. And the health issues, of course.
Well, since we're in the vein of social topics, and I promise we'll get back to the summit, but we have to take
I don't think you promised that, in fact, frankly. It's not sounding that way.
I promise. At the moment in Belize, we're up to 137 murders, which is up from, I think, 15 last year. Yeah. And it's a bit overwhelming because you feel hopeless in terms of what to do, the policies that balance out that kind of structure. Talk to us about how Jamaica, I know that I'm not sure exactly what the situation is in Jamaica, but as it relates to...
Yeah, we're having a serious issue with the increase in violent crime.
19% increase.
Yeah, we have been successful in reducing all other serious crime indices. So rape is down, robbery is down, I'm trying to remember all of the serious crime indices now. You see, when you take me out of my portfolio. But there are 5 to 7 serious crime indices, and shooting and murders are the 2 that are up, which is a challenge for us, a serious challenge for us as an administration. So we have a 5-pillar crime strategy that looks at prevention, looks at response to crimes, as well as the justice system, because those are the 3 sort of timeline elements in criminality. How do we engage our young people to prevent them from going into crime? How do we ensure that we are able to solve the crimes quickly and that persons face a consequence? Therefore, how do we deal with timely delivery of justice? We're looking at the restorative side of justice as well, which is the side that involves the victims as well as the perpetrators of crime, to ensure that the community as a whole is able to deal with these matters, because what you don't want is to be continuously feeding a cycle of crime or to building your cycle of crime. Ensuring that there is a strong rehabilitation program in the prisons, and specifically for young people as well, to ensure that if they have had a small infraction, that your correctional facilities don't serve as incubators for crimes. Support of course, addressing the issue of deportees and how that affects us as well, because essentially these persons go away and live and commit crimes, serious crimes, having learned this criminality elsewhere, and they serve their time, and then they are deported to Jamaica, where if there are not sufficient support mechanisms, or if they are the type of criminal that cannot be rehabilitated, then they simply contribute to our level of crime. So these are all issues that we're dealing with. You know, how do we get sufficient support from our external partners to deal with the rehabilitation when deportees return as well?
Well, that's a very, in terms of crime, and we really thank you for sharing. We appreciate you stepping out a little bit beyond where you would otherwise have gone.
And I reserve the right to not step any further.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we are grateful for every time you step on beyond there. Because one of the issues that, and the parallels between Belize and Jamaica are so amazing. Because one of the issues we've been facing, yesterday's news, was the issue of a threat of extrajudicial killings by the police. I know Jamaica has faced this issue in the past, and in fact was on a watch list for Amnesty International. But you guys have taken positive steps forward. Is there anything in terms of what you guys have done as a country in terms of extrajudicial killings and the relationship between police and civilians? Because that's where we are going right now, is a face-off between the police and a particular section of the police. It's not as bad as your Adams and that sort of issues that you were having in Jamaica. But it's the perception is there, and the animosity between the public and that branch of the police department is there. Could you oblige us in terms of because you guys have already been through it and are on a healthy path to resolving it, relationships between the police and the citizenry, and in terms of extrajudicial killings, what could you share with us in Belize that you guys discussed and are at liberty to?
Well, this was not discussed in this context. So we are still not in summit. But Jamaica established an independent commission. It's called INDICOM, an independent commission of parliament with responsibility to investigate crimes by the police, or extrajudicial killings in particular, because it was felt that as a very basic principle that and it's a basic principle of audit, you cannot investigate yourself in an objective manner. So it was felt that the institution within the police that investigated itself and would always exonerate police was not a sufficiently robust mechanism to maintain the trust between police and the society, and that in fact the level of extrajudicial killings or alleged extrajudicial killings should be increased, had increased massively. So we created an independent commission of parliament, which is part funded by Jamaican government but also supported by international partners, which investigates killings. And this is not a panacea. It has solved a lot of issues in respect of the levels of killings, because clearly there are more circumspect decisions that are taken in terms of planning operations, etc. While recognizing, and this is of course important to recognize as well, that where you have violent criminals, that police must be able to defend themselves and must be able, and when there are engagements, police who are highly trained are more likely to effect deaths than the criminals who are not trained. So there's a basic sort of underlying principle that should also be understood, because your security forces are there to protect the innocent in your population, and therefore they must be empowered so to do. But protocols that ensure that there is reasonable use of force, protocols to ensure that that there is a requisite consideration of human rights. So kicking down somebody's door and pulling them off of the pot that they're cooking is not appropriate conduct, even if they are suspected of a crime, etc., because these are the things that feed into distrust between police and community, which feeds on itself. So INDECOM has done a great job in terms of ensuring that there is greater justice in the system. And also the Ministry of National Security has made great strides in terms of the protocols that are implemented within the police force. We have undertaken a major new initiative called the Special Zones of Operation, which has created a framework within which a zone that is experiencing rampant criminality, high levels of murders, and etc., that
Special rules.
a joint command, which is the defense force and the police together, the heads of the police force and the defense force, will advise the Prime Minister on a zone to declare. And the decision is taken within the context of our National Security Council, which is a body that includes all the security forces, heads of all the security forces, and and the certain ministers, cabinet ministers of government. And the new law provides that when that zone is declared, movement is limited. You must present an ID to go in and out. There are limitations in respect of certainly the activity that can be produced, but also the community is engaged in terms of ensuring that social services are being properly tapped into. So that where you have a marginalized community that has become criminally active, it means something is wrong within the community. So where is the training? Is there a training center for the young people to go to if they have left school without skills? Do people have their birth certificate and whatever to enable them to be able to properly engage with social services? We're bringing those services in. Are the children in school who are supposed to be in school? So the police are given the powers of a truancy officer to insist that children are placed in school, and there's funding put around their ability to be able to address any gaps that might exist in the home in terms of providing school uniform, providing books, etc., so that the community is being re-engaged and re-socialized. So that is one of the things that we have started recently. We have only done 2 zones so far. Continue to work on it.
We had the same in Belize, and it was a bit controversial.
Yeah.
Under our Crime Control and Criminal Justice Act, we had crime-ridden areas, and it allowed the security, the same body to declare it as such.
Let me just say, by the way, just one of the very important things about it is that before the zones were declared, the police and the police who are who can form part of the forces underwent major human rights training, and they are required to wear body cameras, and their guns are all ballistics registered. So every bullet that is fired, and we have not had one, because how it's been managed has been so effective, because it's changed the kick down door mentality. You see, it is that we're going into control, clear, hold, and build, and so to clear the community of crime, hold it in a situation that will allow the members of the community to have trust in the force, to share information about crime, etc., and then to rebuild the community. And so it's a broader strategy that's not built around going in and trying to take out the gunmen. It's about trying to squeeze them out of the community, and then when you squeeze them out, they make mistakes elsewhere and you catch them.
Well, we're quickly running out of time, but I definitely want to get back to the summit. I'll keep my promise. and because I'm also interested, I know that there was an action document, a declaration that was made yesterday. Tell us a little bit more about how it was formed and the path to moving forward.
Well, it's if I recall correctly, it's 26 points in the declaration, encompassing the scope of the areas in which we will cooperate, and also recognizing broadly the cooperative spirit between Mexico and the region. So it addressed for example, the evaluation of the last summit, the programs coming out of the last summit. It addressed how we will cooperate going forward, so in areas of disaster resource management, disaster and risk management, trade and investment, health, NCDs, and statistics, because of course our ability to pull together, to measure what is happening in our societies allows us not only to better plan but to better address issues which we have. So those areas are to be addressed in the new cooperative program 2017 to 2019, as well as addressing issues which may not have been completed in the last program, such as, for example, there's an NCD workshop which wasn't yet held, that's to be held early next year, and also a seminar to deal with de-risking, which is a major issue as well, which was discussed yesterday as well. De-risking and graduation, which are both areas also addressed in the declaration. How it is that we recognize that graduation as a principle, which is the method by which OECD countries designate countries to be, whether least developed countries or more developed countries or middle income countries, upper, lower, middle income, etc., which all affects your ability to access funds. And that the program that has been used, or the criteria that are used, which is essentially GDP per capita, how that's insufficient, how it's insufficient recognition of our economic realities and of our relative vulnerabilities, and how it is that we will advocate globally for a change to that structure. This is addressed significantly in there. Our preparation for MC11, which is the next WTO ministerial conference. We have stated our commitment to a rules-based multilateral trading system, because that is, of course, the only way that small countries like ours, which don't have the leverage, we don't have the economic firepower to be able to negotiate one-on-one with major economies and have the best and a fair result for both sides. So a rules-based multilateral system which guides all of us is what we believe in, and we're therefore supporting the preparations for MC11, which takes place in December in Buenos Aires. And of course, it's the first time it's being held in South America ever, which is a big deal for us as well. So we're all standing in support of that.
And just from your personal perspective, how satisfied are you with the discussions that were held yesterday?
Oh, I thought they were excellent. The summit is, again, the fact that it took place when both Mexico and CARICOM are being so significantly affected by natural disasters, that we would sit, make the time, that heads would make the time, ministers of foreign affairs, the president of Mexico himself and his minister of foreign affairs and team, that we're present and dedicate time and resources to actually manifest in increased cooperation. It's important. One of the things that we looked at was the success of this Mesoamerican Fund again, which I can't, in the context of graduation where our access to funding is so limited, it is such an important program. So I think it was an excellent discussion, the integral risk strategy for the Caribbean, how it is proposed to assist, and Ronald Jackson, the head of CDIMA, was present as well. So he was able to identify on the spot which elements were most likely to be of immediate assistance and where the synergies could exist, so that you're not sort of going down a path talking about the support that can be given without assessing the appropriateness of the support and where it feeds into existing systems. So I thought that was very helpful and well thought out.
Well, Minister, we are so grateful for indulging us as we
thank you.
tread off the beaten path. Thank you so much for being here. All your insight is really appreciated.
Thank you very much. I was very happy to be here. Thank you very much, and I wish you both the best, and congrats on your great show. Thank you. Thanks for making me be a part of it.
And we hope to see you again in 5 days.
Yes. No, not in 5 days. 4 or 5 days.
Oh, 4 or 5 days.
No.
In 5 days, 4 or 5 days.
My schedule is blocked out way in advance. But yes, I hope I get to come back and visit with you both when I'm back in Belize.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, it's to talk to Aaron Crone about his Placencia Yoga Studios. Stay tuned.